because we got an email. Remember what was it? Was several weeks back. I don't know. I've lost track of time. It could have been months. Who knows? But we got a question about Charles Midget Fischer from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But he was the question said that I believe he was from Butternut, Wisconsin, or whatever the.
Right.
And we thought, is this a rib? And I believe we laughed at it, right? To some extent. But come to find out, but the thing is that we were trying to think of, for one thing, small people, but also this goes way back. There was a Charles Midget Fischer and a Santa Claus, Victoria. There was a Charles Midget Fischer, but his heyday was the 20s and 30s. And not being of the notoriety of the Strangler Lewises and etc., we weren't thinking about Charles Midget Fischer. So see that in the vast history of wrestling, did you heard of him?
I hadn't heard of him either. And after the show, I went to look through the files, and I went through the midget files thinking it would be there. Because the email we got didn't say anything about him being a heavyweight or in that, wrestling heavyweights or anyone above. It just said midget. It just said midget.
Well,
midget.
He wasn't a heavyweight, but he did wrestle somewhat above his weight class. But he was so far back that they did have in those days. And this was the way Roy Welch and Nick Goulas got Nashville. Was the other promoter had been featuring the heavyweights, and Scott Teal's research. Thankfully, we know these things. Crowbarpress.com, folks. But Nick and Roy came in. Roy had the light heavyweights. The guys, because as Roy was 190 pounds, but in those days, that wasn't as small for athletes as it seems in modern times. But the light heavyweights would a lot of times have more action, etc., and they sometimes would win out if you didn't have top quality heavyweights or a good promotion opposite it. And that's apparently Charles Midget. I ran into his goddamn name when I was looking up something else for something else I'm doing, if that's clear enough. And Charles Midget Fischer wrestled in Louisville at the Louisville Gardens, which was then the Armory, in like 1936. Because he obviously out of the Midwest. So anyway, yes, Virginia, there was a Charles Midget Fischer, and we got an email from Adam Smith of East Yorkshire, England, who has researched this thing out to Yin Yang. And I will read it here because his research project was looking at the career of Wild Bill Longson.
Oh, that should be a microbrew. Wild Beer Longson.
Wild Beer Longson. Wild Bill Longson and his popularization of the pile driver. And while he was doing that, he had uncovered this information. The topic of who invented the pile driver in professional wrestling is a matter debated amongst historians. In the modern day, Bill Longson is often credited as being the innovator of the move, and whilst this is incorrect, he was certainly the professional wrestler responsible for the wider popularization of the move. But the first noted use of the pile driver occurred January 5th, 1931 by Charles Midget Fischer in Kansas City, Missouri. Fischer was a claimant to the World Middleweight Championship. On the show, he had defeated Sailor Jack Woods in 34 minutes with a quote-unquote pile drive. And apparently Kenneth R. Bones, there's two S's on the end of it, who penned Charlie Fisher's biography, Pile Driver, The Life of Charles Midget Fischer, which you may have a comment on, later explained that in his research for the book, he had spoken extensively with Charles's son, who had explained that the move was markedly different from what modern fans would recognize as a pile driver. The Fisher pile driver would see the opponent's head clamped between Fischer's thighs. Fischer would then only partially lift the opponent's feet off the, he says floor, but the mat, and then quickly, quote unquote, flick out his feet, sending the opponent's head crashing into the canvas. And let's stop there for a second, Brian, but this makes sense for something we're going to hear in the second paragraph. But it does add a, because Bill Longson was certainly not pile driving anybody in 1931, but we will come to find out why he might have seen it done. So it's all there's always you never can invent anything that isn't really a takeoff anymore, as Gomer Pyle would say. I guess that's my point.
You know, and there's always these mysteries about so many of the things that are commonplace in wrestling and have been for, 50, 60 years, whatever now. We really don't know where they started. We assume, Danny McShane may have invented the blade, but maybe that's not a fair assumption. I will say, I assumed while Bill Longson was one of the first people to use the pile driver just because he is the name that everyone associates with it going back to the 40s. But he must have seen something somewhere. And you brought up Buddy Rogers, not even about this, about something else recently, about the crisscross. That's what it was. About his ability to see things and pick up on what other people were doing and apply it to his own work.
Well, Rogers is about to come into this too. So Adam continues, and here's where this starts to make sense. While Fischer's version of the move lacked the theatrical nature that would later be associated to the application of the pile driver, he had brought the move into pro wrestling. The pile driver was further popularized by one of Fischer's adversaries in the ring, the Great Mephisto. And this isn't Frankie Kane, the Great Mephisto. This is the guy that Frankie Kane stole the name the Great Mephisto from. This was another guy that was a light heavyweight at best in the pioneer days of the 30s. And Frankie Kane, in his first book, Scott Teal, crowbarpress.com, goes into detail.
Is the name of the book.
Raising Cain goes into great detail about this guy and how he was one of the great workers. And I will before we go back to this paragraph, I'll preface this by saying, when guys in that era are talked about as being great workers, it's not that they were doing moonsaults or executing these, goddamn stunning revolutionary moves. They talk about them being great workers as far as the ability to not only draw a crowd, but captivate a crowd and have a match that was different than the normal shit that people saw, that took them a step up in terms of, oh my gosh, they're into it, or the peaks and valleys, the roller coaster ride, and making sure their shit looked good and different. That's the type of thing that they compliment great workers. And Adam continues, Mephisto was born Julius John Waronic on the 4th of December, 1910 in Meriden, Connecticut. And he goes into some history on him, and he has annotated all these with newspaper attributions, which I'm not going to go into, but I've heard the stories before of the Great Mephisto. He was in trouble and in jail when he was a teenager, and he was in a near fatal car wreck. But finally, in 1928, he becomes a wrestler, and his first known appearance as Mephisto occurred in Boston at the Mechanics Hall on April 6, 1932. And he ended up being a popular attraction for the promoter there. He attracted 6,000 to Fenway Park to watch him beat Art Flynn in August 1932. Well, the Great Mephisto worked for Al, not even the previous, the pre-Al Half territory out of Columbus in the mid-30s. And in March 1935, the Great Mephisto first encountered Charlie Fischer in the Music Hall Sports Arena in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the match lasted 20 seconds and ended when Fischer executed the pile driver on Mephisto. By that summer, 2 or 3 months later, Mephisto was using the pile driver to win his matches. And it was then touted as his signature hold. Mephisto not only was so good that he attracted Frankie Kane, who was growing up and starting to become aware of the business at that time, but also Nature Boy Buddy Rogers has said before that Mephisto was the greatest in-ring worker that ever lived. And Rogers, is some of his early formative years were in Ohio. And if you go back, and Brian, now you'll think about this because you can visualize what they're saying, because Rogers did a pile driver more like this than he did a normal, not even a modern day pile driver, but a Bill Longson pile driver. He would grab the guy either by the ass of the tights or just, around the waist, but he would sit down real quick. It was more of just a quick leaping motion, boom, rather than a pick up and a drop. And you've seen that in a number of the matches that Rogers used.
Yeah.
So he had to get it from, a guy who pretty much got it from the source. And according to Adam, once again, with this, all kinds of research to back it up, by the fall of 1937, the move had come to the attention of Wild Bill Longson, and he would use it as his trademark for the rest of his life. But even though there's not that much Longson out there, the publicity pictures that he had taken of him, you've seen him with a guy up in the pile driver position, has him picking a guy all the way straight up. So anyway, the midget strikes again.
Well, I got the biography. I'm going to try to find a way to read it. I have a lot of books to get caught up on, and this is a big one. I sent you a picture. The back cover of the book
is
the greatest photo of an author I've ever seen, because he clearly chose it himself, and this is what he wanted to share with the world. And again, I'm puzzled by the choice, but I love it. It's my favorite thing about the book. I haven't read it yet.
Well, we don't know the author, so we're not trying to, but it's an odd choice. It's worth the price of the book alone to see the picture.
It's not even in focus.
This fellow.
It's not even in focus.
Oh, it's in focus enough. But Adam, we thank you from East Yorkshire, England, who, it's a shame that the folks over in the UK have to do our research, that we've lost out on this, that all this stuff happened in Connecticut and Ohio and Minneapolis and places like that. And it's got to come from East Yorkshire. Where are our domestic historians when we need them?
And most of them may be limp. The problem is we need a really good book and a really good history of Ohio, and that hasn't really been done yet, because people probably lose sight on for how long that was a powerhouse for wrestling, how many guys were booked out of Ohio, how successful things were in Ohio, because it went away pretty early. It went away, when did Ohio go away? Early 60s? Mid 60s? And then, guys ran there and brought it back at times, but in terms of it being a powerhouse in wrestling.
Well, see, it didn't as much go away as it got split up, because in those days, and especially with Al Haft in Columbus and him being a powerful promoter and centrally located, Ohio to the various Midwestern and Northeastern states and even the Mid-Atlantic states, but once that, he faded by the wayside and Cincinnati became part of the Sheik's territory. Well, Cincinnati, firstly, was taken over by Barnett in the late 50s, along with the rest of the Sheik's territory and Bruisers, what would become Sheik's and Bruisers territory. But Columbus kind of went in that direction, but Cleveland got taken by the Northeastern Buffalo circuit. So they started, when Al Haft lost his power and pull and business, they started, annexing the territories adjacent, different towns in Ohio, and even some of the towns in the lower part of Ohio, in West Virginia, were part of the WWF for a while. So it just, and then the Pittsburgh territory was around for a while. It was part of that. So it just kind of got all split up, is the answer to the question that I think you asked, because it's been so long since I started rambling.
It's been a while. You know what
Hey, did you walk off away from me? You're echoing.
No, I was grabbing something back here because I actually just got it. You brought up Pittsburgh. This is a Tri-State Wrestling TV Stars booklet / magazine. Rogers on the cover with the belt. So this is, I'm going to say 63. Joseph Tootsmont, Secretary Treasurer of Pennsylvania Wrestling Inc. and Pittsburgh's promoter. Vincent McMahon.
I can believe Secretary. Would you make Tootsmont the treasurer of anything?
No. Vincent McMahon, President of Pennsylvania Wrestling Inc. and promoter in Washington, D.C. Fred Kohler, Vice President of Pennsylvania Wrestling Inc. and promoter in Chicago. And finally, Gene Dargan, an associate promoter of Pennsylvania Wrestling Inc. in the tri-state area. And the first article here is about our renaissance of wrestling. Live action on Channel 11. And then also I have here, is this the one that has... This came out like a year later. Listen to this title history. You ready? I'll start in 42 with Bill Longson.
Uh-oh.
Bill Longson defeated Sabo. Ivan Robert defeated Longson. Bobby Manigoff defeated Robert. Bill Longson defeated Manigoff. Now we're in 47. Whipper Billy Watson defeated Longson. Lou Thez defeated Watson. Longson defeated Thez. Thez defeated Longson. Whipper Billy Watson defeated Thez, 56. Lou Thez defeats Watson. Dick Hutton defeats Thez. Pat O'Connor defeated Hutton. Buddy Rogers defeated Pat O'Connor. Bruno Sammartino defeated Buddy Rogers. So this pretends that the WWF title history is from the NWA title history, which obviously goes pre-NWA there.
Aye. Well, but because and later on, Bruno would own that territory. And they would mostly consider themselves for the next, 50 years, either a WWF town or WWF adjacent, with Bruno's promotion used a lot of the same talent, even though he had his guys. So they had kind of annexed that part of the country there.
You know, someone recently sent us the last thing on any of this, even though it loosely relates to it. Hank Garrett, the actor, and I think he may have been a stuntman, but...
Oh, yes, I saw that, but go ahead.
Well, he wrestled apparently also, and he teamed up with Lenny Montana. He had some stories about that, but he was asked, I think it was Gilbert Gottfried's show. They asked him, how'd you become a wrestler? And he's like, I was working at a gym and I met this guy, Tootsmont, and he said, you should be a wrestler. And I said, okay. He goes, you're the Minnesota farm boy. And that was my gimmick. They just gave me this gimmick. Tootsmont giving out gimmicks. This guy was from like the Bronx or something. They made him the Minnesota farm boy.
But now see, that's
Harlem.
an experience.
He's from Harlem. I looked it up. He's from Harlem.
That's an experience you couldn't pay for. He got his gimmick personally from Tootsmont, who pretty much invented fucking gimmicks.
Yeah. That may have been one of the last gimmicks he actually came up with, when you think about it.
Well, no wonder, because it didn't go anywhere. Because we didn't even know that this fucking actor was a wrestler until he revealed it 50 years later. It's a closely guarded secret. So I'm surprised it wasn't a Jack Pfeffer.
He was Officer Nicholson on Car 54, Where Are You?
Son of a bitch. But that means he's got to be
93.
I was about to say, he's got to be 90 years old minimum. All right. Well, who knows? It may have been Jack Pfeffer. He might not remember which guy was which.
I don't know.
Because he probably doesn't get enough sleep, Brian.
Why would you say that? Just because of his age?
Well, he's old. He's up probably every 30 minutes going to take a piss.
Well, I'd like to think of it the other way. I think maybe he gets a lot of sleep. He gets so much sleep, he feels good, and he probably need some support, the right kind of support, the right kind of mattress. Trying to keep this on track early on. Of
No,
course,
no, no. I thought they give us. See, here's the problem. Problem is that he was screwed around by Toots Mondt. He can't afford. He's been sleeping on soup cans. His last hit was Car 54. Where are you? That was 1963.
Was it his last hit?
There's a holdup in the Bronx. Brooklyn's broken out in fights. There's a traffic jam in Harlem that's backed up to Jackson Heights. Anyway,
There's a
so he
troop
made
short a child.
cruise ships do it idlewild.
Car 54,
Where are you? All right. Anyway, see, that's why he's sleeping on bags of soup cans in an alleyway, because his last hit was before residuals. So he can't. But you folks that have normal jobs and are vim and vigorous and of youthful trim and energy instead of this 93-year-old guy sleeping on soup cans, you can afford a Helix sleep mattress because it's cheaper than if you go to the big old mattress store where people have been laying on these mattresses, spreading all their daggum DNA around and the follicles of their skin and then it attaches to you and your clothing when you get on the tester. And oh my God, you should see what happens when the rot sets in. Or you can just go to helixsleep.com right now and just take a nice little quiz. Just tell them what you like. What do you like to sleep on, a hard surface or a soft surface or a medium surface? Or are you cold? Are you hot? You know, the children can get their own mattress from Helix. As a matter of fact, Charles Midget Fischer could have got one of the kids' mattresses, and he probably would have lived longer.
No, first of all, we'll take a step back. First of all, he was an adult, so he probably could have fit on a regular size mattress, even though he was called the midget. But secondly, we can't say that he would have lived longer, but maybe he would have had more comfort during his years.
Well, during his final hours, he could have just drifted off peacefully instead of those horrible screams of pain. Oh my God, when he died, he was sleeping on barbed wire because that's all they had back then.
That's not what they had back then.
And broken glass. Oh my God, it hurts. Oh, I'm gonna die. And then he died.
Again, this nothing to do with the mattress, and the mattress wasn't even there because Helix was just a twinkle in the eye of Mr. Helix and his grandfather and the rest of the Helix family.
A gleam in the eye of his father, as Mama Cornette used to say. But now that there's a helixsleep.com, there's no excuse for you not to go there and get a mattress instead of dying in horrible screaming agony like Charles Midget Fischer. You don't want that to happen, do you?
Again, we don't know how he died. We shouldn't.
Well, do you want to die in any manner that Charles Midget Fischer died? Or do you want to have a great night's sleep? I think I know which one I'm going to choose. I'm going to go over to helixsleep.com and take that quiz and get one of these mattresses delivered to my home. And they're not even that hard to move around once you get them in the house. Of course, if you do want to invite the moving men in, have dinner, let them unbox the thing, and all they got to do is take the box cutter and put it where you want it. Then poof, it comes to life. But you can invite strangers into your home. They may put things in their pockets. You don't know. It's very easy to do this yourself, but who am I to judge? Anyway, once it's delivered, it's set up, then you fall right into bed and you're flying among angels. Suddenly the birds are do 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 do. It's a wonderful morning on the farm. You can even smell the pigs and the cows. So go out and milk them. Don't get any on your new mattress, folks. But anyway, Brian, have you ever milked the cows early in the morning?
I have never milked a cow, no.
You've never milked a cow?
No, we really didn't do that on Long Island too often. There were a lot of dairy farms, but that wasn't something that us kids did for fun.
Well, that's why you were down the road from the dairy farms. You should have got into the dairy life and become a dairy person.
Dairy life.
at the end of the dairy life where you live on the dairy farm and you milk the dairy cows for the dairy products that are sold in the dairy store. And every morning you wake up and you smell that dairy air. So anyway, folks, you're going to wake up refreshed on your Helix Sleep mattress when you go to helixsleep.com/JCE. You're going to get 20% off and 2 free dream pillows with the mattress purchase. Now, they're not just going to give you 2 free pillows and 20% off unless you buy something. Then when you buy the thing, then they'll give you the 20% off and the 2 free dread. That's a fair trade. Wouldn't you say, Brian? It's a hand-in-hand bargain.
What's a fair trade?
You give them money and they give you 20% off and free pillows.
That sounds like a good deal. I wouldn't call it a trade. I would call it a wonderful deal for a wonderful
that's an
mattress.
exchange. It's an exchange of one thing for another.
It is a transaction.
Tit for tat.
It's a transaction in order to get a great night's sleep on a great mattress. We love them here. You love them there. The listeners will love them everywhere. Helix Sleep.
Helix Sleep. Quid pro quo. Send them money, they'll send you comfort.
Well, let's just call that a deal. Again, why use these terms that necessarily or that don't necessarily have a good connotation on
Well,
them?
because I'm a small town bird lawyer and I'm going to make it sound all complicated.
I thought you said Louisville was a booming metropolis.
They are. Once we try to keep these big city folks out and maintain our small town birds, then I can still be a small town bird lawyer. But again, folks, Helix. Have I said it enough? Sleep on a Helix or don't sleep and just refuse to sleep if you can't get a Helix or you don't have access to it or whatever. I don't know why you wouldn't. They're right there at helixsleep.com/JCE. But go on strike and don't sleep until you get a Helix mattress. Your family at least will thank us for it.
No, they won't. We don't want to encourage anyone to do that. Get a good night's sleep.
It depends on what's in the will.
Get a good night's sleep and know that night's sleep could get even better, even more comfortable. You will love Helix Sleep like I do, like my family does. And let's now get that wonderful promo code from Jim Cornette.
JCE.
HelixSleep.com.
Yes, I said that already.
Well, this is your show.